Imagine two teams, same exhaustion, same freezing cold, same impossible task. One team is dominating every race. The other is collapsing, falling apart in the surf, cursing each other, losing badly. Now change one thing. You swap the leaders, not the people, not the gear, not the weather, just the leaders. Within 30 minutes, the worst team becomes the best. This actually happened. It was watched in real time by some of the most experienced warriors on Earth. And the principle behind that freezing California night explains why most companies, most teams, and most families fail, even when nothing seems to be wrong. What you're about to hear comes from a book written by two Navy SEAL officers who fought in what was, at the time, the deadliest place on Earth, the city of Ramadi in Iraq in 2006. Their book is called Extreme Ownership, and it's been sitting near the top of the leadership bestseller lists for over a decade. But here's the thing. This isn't really a book about war. It's a book about something most people get catastrophically wrong every single day, in their jobs, in their relationships, in their lives, and almost never realize it. It's about who actually owns what when things go sideways, who's responsible, who gets the blame, and what happens to a team, any team, when a leader stops looking for someone to point at and starts looking in the mirror. The two men who wrote this book are Jocko Willink and Leif Babin. Jocko commanded SEAL Task Unit Bruiser, which was one of the most decorated special operations units of the Iraq War. Leif was one of his platoon commanders. They watched friends die. They made calls that cost lives, and they came home with a question burning in their heads. What is it exactly that separates the leaders who win from the leaders who lose? What they found is that it almost never has to do with talent, or charisma, or experience, or even the people on the team. It comes down to 12 principles. 12 principles forged in combat, tested in business, and ruthless in their honesty about what leadership actually demands. Over the next 50 minutes or so, I'm going to walk you through every one of those principles. We'll start with the master principle that everything else hangs on. Then we'll go to a freezing California beach in the middle of Hell Week, where the lesson from the hook actually played out in real time. We'll go inside a building in South Central Ramadi, where a SEAL operator falls through a roof while an IED is about to detonate. And we'll meet the men this book is dedicated to, 3 SEALs who didn't come home. By the end, you might find yourself rethinking every team you've ever been part of, every job, every relationship, because the hard truth this book delivers is that almost everything you've been blaming on circumstance, on bad luck, on other people, almost all of it traces back to one quiet, uncomfortable place. Let's begin. Section 1. The Master Principle. Extreme Ownership. Picture this. Dawn in Ramadi, Iraq, May 2006. The city is on fire, literal fire, in the streets, where insurgents have set tires alight, and the smoke is mixing with dust kicked up by American tanks and powdered concrete from buildings being torn apart by machine gun fire. You can barely see 10 feet in front of you. Through this fog, a SEAL commander named Jocko Willink is rolling toward the sound of gunfire in an armored Humvee. He doesn't know it yet, but in the next 10 minutes, his career is about to end, or it's about to begin, depending on what he does next. His task unit had 4 separate elements operating across this neighborhood that morning. 300 American and Iraqi troops, 2 SEAL sniper teams in overwatch positions, a SEAL element embedded with Iraqi soldiers clearing buildings door to door, and the radios were exploding with chatter. Wounded men, killed men, units lost, fire support being called in from every direction. Then a transmission comes through that makes Jocko's stomach drop. One of his SEAL sniper teams is calling for the heavy QRF, the Quick Reaction Force. They want Abrams tanks, M1A2 main battle tanks with 120mm main guns. When SEALs ask for tanks, it means they are in serious trouble. Jocko's Humvee rolls up behind one of those Abrams, The tank's main gun is trained point blank on a building across the street. Jocko steps out into the chaos. A Marine gunnery sergeant is coordinating an airstrike on that same building. Bombs from the sky, on top of the tank fire, on top of the rifle and machine gun fire that's already turned the walls into Swiss cheese. But something doesn't add up. Jocko knew one of his sniper teams was supposed to be operating somewhere very close to where he's standing right now. They had relocated when the shooting started, and in the chaos, they hadn't reported their new position. He looks at that bullet-riddled building, and he gets a feeling. He motions to his senior enlisted SEAL. They cross the street, toward the building everyone else is trying to destroy. He kicks open the door, and he's looking at his own SEAL platoon chief. It was a blue-on-blue, friendly fire. The worst thing that can happen on a battlefield. In the fog of war, a rogue group of Iraqi soldiers had wandered into a sector they weren't supposed to be in. The SEAL snipers, seeing armed silhouettes approaching their building in the pre-dawn dark, did what they had been trained to do. They engaged. The Iraqi soldiers returned fire. American Marines and Army troops poured in to help, dumping hundreds of rounds into a building they thought was full of enemy fighters, when it was actually full of their own. One Iraqi soldier was dead, a SEAL was wounded, and the Marines had been seconds away from putting an airstrike on top of their own people. Word travels fast. By the time Jocko is back at the base, every SEAL in his task unit knows. The wounded man's friends are angry. The chain of command is angry. There's an investigating officer flying in from a higher headquarters. The commanding officer wants a full debrief, and someone in front of the entire chain of command is going to have to stand up and explain how this happened. So who do you think gets blamed? The young SEAL sniper who pulled the trigger first? The Iraqi soldiers who wandered out of their sector? The Marine team that almost called in a bomb on friendlies? The radio operators who failed to deconflict the units in the first place? In a meeting room with the commanding officer, the master chief, the investigating officer, and the SEALs from his task unit all sitting silent, Jocko stands up. He takes a deep breath, and he says, "There is only one person to blame for this. Me. I am the commander. I am responsible for the entire operation. There is no one to blame but me, and I will tell you this right now. I will make sure that nothing like this ever happens to us again." He expected to be fired. He expected to lose everything. He had every reason to believe his career as a SEAL leader was over, but the opposite happened, because here's what Jocko learned in that room. When a leader takes total responsibility, not the convenient kind, not the partial kind, but the full burden of ownership, the team's trust in that leader doesn't decrease, it increases. The SEALs in the troop didn't expect him to fall on his sword, and when he did, they respected it. The commanding officer's faith in him deepened, not the opposite, because if Jocko had pointed at someone else, at the snipers, at the Iraqis, at anyone, he would have been fired, and he would have deserved it. So what is this principle exactly? It has a name: extreme ownership. On any team, in any organization, all responsibility for success and failure rests with the leader, period. The leader owns everything in their world. There is no one else to blame. Not bad luck, not difficult circumstances, not underperforming team members. When something goes wrong, the leader looks first at themselves when subordinates aren't doing what they should. Extreme ownership says, the leader didn't explain it well enough. When the team misses a deadline, extreme ownership says, the leader didn't explain it well enough. When the new hire fails, extreme ownership says, the leader didn't train them well enough, or hired the wrong person to begin with. It's all on the leader. This sounds extreme because it is. The word is right there in the title, but Jocko and Leif mean it. So how does this look outside a war zone? Let me tell you about a vice president of manufacturing at a pharmaceutical company. Years after Jocko left the SEALs, he started consulting with companies on leadership, and one day he was sent in to coach a VP whose plan to streamline operations had completely stalled out. A great plan on paper, approved by the board, detailed, well-researched, technically sound, but nothing was happening. Jocko sits down with this man, and the VP tells him a long, articulate story about why nothing's happening. The plant managers are resistant to change. The distribution team is worried about logistics. The sales team is teaming up with manufacturing to push back. The market is tough. New technology has been complicated. There's been a host of factors. He has a reason for everything, and Jocko listens patiently. Then he asks one question. He says, "Could there be one most important reason your plan has failed?" The VP says, "What reason is that?" Jocko looks him in the eye and says, You are the reason." The VP is furious. He starts defending himself. He didn't fail to lead, they failed to follow. He delivered the plan over and over. He can't make people execute. He's not out there in the field with them. He can't make them listen. And Jocko says, "That's the whole problem. You're describing exactly what a leader's job is and explaining why you don't have to do it." Then he tells the VP about combat. He tells him about all the missions that went wrong, the bad intelligence, the mistakes by junior leaders, the shooters engaging the wrong target, the supporting unit that didn't show up. And he says, "When those things happened, you know who I blamed? Me. I blamed me, because if a supporting unit didn't do what we needed, it meant I hadn't given clear instructions. If a machine gunner engaged a target outside his field of fire, it meant I hadn't ensured he understood where his field of fire was. If the enemy surprised us where we hadn't expected, it meant I hadn't thought through all the possibilities. No matter what, when something went wrong, it was my responsibility." Now you're listening to this, and there's a part of you maybe that's resisting, because we live in a culture that rewards the opposite of this. We're trained, almost from childhood, to find the external explanation. The teacher was unfair, the boss didn't understand, the market changed. The kids are just like that these days. The economy, the luck, the timing, and those things are real. Of course they're real. The market does change. Some bosses are unfair. Bad luck exists. But extreme ownership is not about denying that those things happen. It's about who you become when they do. Because here's what Jocko and Leif discovered. In combat and in business, the moment a leader starts pointing outward, the team feels it instantly. People can smell when leadership is shifting blame, and the moment they smell it, the team's performance starts dying. Trust collapses, initiative dies, excuses start spreading downward through the organization, because if the boss does it, everyone else does too. But when a leader does the opposite, when a leader takes the heat, owns the failure, and refuses to point at anyone else, something almost magical happens. The team rises. People who were defensive become accountable. People who were hiding mistakes start surfacing them. And the same conditions that were producing failure start producing wins. So here's the question this principle leaves you with. Think about the last time something went wrong at your job, in your home, in a project you were leading. Where did your mind go first? To the people who let you down? To the conditions that worked against you? To the bad luck of the timing? Or to yourself? Because the answer to that question, the very first place your mind goes, tells you, more than almost anything else, what kind of leader you currently are, and whether the team you lead has any chance at all of becoming great. If extreme ownership is the master principle, then this next one is its most uncomfortable consequence. Because once you accept that the leader owns everything, you're forced to confront a second truth that most managers, parents, and coaches will spend their entire lives trying to avoid. Section 2. No bad teams, only bad leaders. To understand this one, you have to picture a specific stretch of beach in Coronado, California. It's 3 in the morning. It's freezing. Not the kind of freezing you complain about in a parking lot. The kind of freezing where you've been wet for so long that your skin is starting to chafe through your fatigues, where every grain of sand feels like broken glass. You haven't slept in 72 hours. You've eaten just enough to stay upright, and in front of you is a 200-pound rubber boat called an IBS, inflatable boat. Small. The Navy named it during World War II. Generations of SEAL candidates have hated it ever since. This is Hell Week, the infamous 5.5-day gauntlet that breaks most aspiring SEALs and remakes the rest. 200 men start, 40 might finish. The instructors aren't there to test your fitness. By this point, fitness has been long since proven. They're there to find out who can keep functioning, keep thinking, keep leading, when their body is screaming at them to lie down on the wet sand and quit. One of the men running this Hell Week is Leif Babin himself. Years before, he had been a candidate on this same beach. Now he's an instructor, and he's watching something that, even with all his experience, surprises him. The candidates are organized into 7-man boat crews. Each crew has a leader, usually the most senior man in the group. They race the boats, through the surf, over sand berms, across the obstacle course, down the beach and back. And in this Hell Week, 2 boat crews are standing out, for very different reasons. Boat Crew 2 is dominating. They win or nearly win every single race. They move in unison, they cover for each other's weaknesses. When one of them stumbles, the others adjust without being told. After every win, they get a few minutes of rest while the other crews suffer through another race. Even soaking wet, even exhausted, even at 3 in the morning, Boat Crew 2's faces have something on them that's almost unbelievable in this environment. Smiles. Boat Crew 6 is the opposite. They are dead last in every single race. And not by a little. They're falling behind so badly that the instructors can hear them from 100 yards away, cursing each other in the dark, blaming each other, accusing each other of not pulling their weight. They are tearing themselves apart in the water. The instructors take notice. They start punishing the crew for poor performance. Sprint to the surf, get wet, bear crawl across the sand, hold the boat at extended arm carry overhead until your shoulders give out. The misery multiplies, and Boat Crew 6's performance gets worse. The leader of Boat Crew 6 is a young officer, and in his mind, none of this is his fault. He's been dealt a terrible hand. He has a team of underperformers. No amount of effort on his part can fix it, so why try? Then the senior chief, the most experienced and respected non-commissioned officer on the instructor cadre, pulls Leif aside, and he says something that's about to change Leif's entire understanding of leadership. He says, "Let's swap the boat crew leaders, best with worst. Everything else stays the same. Same boats, same men, same cold. Just swap the leaders, and let's see what happens." Leif's first reaction is doubt. Could that possibly make any difference? Same exhausted men, same impossible task. What difference can one person actually make? The order goes out over the megaphone. Boat Crew 2 leader, you're now leading Boat Crew 6. Boat Crew 6 leader, you're now leading Boat Crew 2. The 2 officers run to their new positions. The Boat Crew 2 leader looks unhappy. He's leaving a team he built, a team he knows, a team that's winning. He has every reason to expect this is going to be a humiliation. The Boat Crew 6 leader, on the other hand, looks visibly relieved. Justice has finally been done. He's been rescued from his terrible team and given a winning one. Now things will be easy. The instructor's command goes out. Stand by. Bust 'em. The crews charge into the surf, paddles striking water, bodies straining. The boats pass through the breakers, dump their crews, recover, paddle down the beach. The instructor's headlights catch the boats coming back in toward the finish line. 2 boats are out front, almost neck and neck, and as they cross the line, the numbers become visible. Boat Crew 6 is in first place. The crew that had been finishing dead last every single race for the entire night was now winning, and it didn't stop there. Over the next hour, they won race after race. Boat Crew 2, under their new leader, still performed well. They were a strong team, but Boat Crew 6 was now beating them. Same men, same boats, same cursed 200-pound rubber craft, same freezing surf. One thing changed. the leader. So what does this mean? It means something Jocko and Leif state in 5 words you can probably already feel coming. Because if a leader can take the worst team in the class and make them the best, without changing a single member of that team, then what does that say about every other team in your life that you've ever called bad? No bad teams, only bad leaders. This is the principle, and it is brutal in its honesty, because once you accept extreme ownership, once you accept that leadership is the variable that matters, you also have to accept this, that every team you've ever thought was lazy, or unmotivated, or full of difficult people, was, more likely than not, a team without the right leader at the top. Jocko and Leif put it bluntly. When a leader sets high standards and the team meets them, the leader has done their job. When a leader sets high standards and the team fails to meet them, the leader has to look at themselves, because raising standards isn't enough. The leader has to enforce them, has to hold the line, has to make sure every member of the team understands what good looks like, and that good is the only thing that's acceptable. It's not enough to say the standards are high. You have to actually live like they are. And here's where this hits home for most of us, because most of us, at some point, have led something. A team at work, a small business, a volunteer group, a household, a relationship, a child's homework routine, and most of us, when something starts going wrong, default to the same explanation. The team is broken, the people are wrong, the conditions are bad. If only I had better people, this would work. But the leader of Boat Crew 6 thought exactly that. He was sure. He believed it with his whole heart. And the moment a different leader stood at the front of the boat, his theory collapsed in less than 30 minutes. The team wasn't broken. The team was just waiting for someone to lead it. So if you've been telling yourself that your team, at work, at home, anywhere, is just unfortunate, just dealt a bad hand, just full of the wrong personalities, this principle is asking you to consider, just for a moment, the possibility that the team has been fine all along, and what's actually been broken is something a lot closer to home. But extreme ownership and no bad teams are only the first 2 pillars of the inner battle. There are 2 more, and the next one is what makes the difference between leaders who fight upward against orders they don't understand and leaders who actually move missions forward. Section 3. Believe and check the ego. To set this one up, I want you to picture Jocko Willink sitting in a small operations room at a base called Shark Base on the outskirts of Camp Ramadi, Iraq. He's reading an order that has just come down from his higher command, and the more he reads, the more his blood pressure rises. His SEAL Task Unit Bruiser, the most highly trained warriors on the planet, has just been ordered to embed with the conventional Iraqi army, to execute every mission, in his words, by, with, and through Iraqi security forces. Now you have to understand what that means to him in the moment. Jocko's SEALs were like a professional sports team that had been together for years. They had trained until they could recognize each other's silhouettes in the dark. They had fired thousands of rounds through some of the best weapons in the world. They had practiced patrolling, breaching, communicating, until they were almost a single organism moving across a battlefield. They were elite in the truest sense of the word, ready for anything, and now they were being told to fight side by side with conventional Iraqi soldiers who, by Jocko's own honest admission, were among the worst in the world. Many were poor and uneducated. Some couldn't do a few push-ups. Some had bribed their way into rank. Many would, when the bullets started flying, simply desert. Some had loyalties that pointed in directions that weren't friendly to American forces. And now Jocko's SEALs, his brothers, were going to have to operate with these men by their side, in the deadliest city on earth, where one mistake meant somebody bleeding out on a Ramadi street. He hated this order, so Jocko did what most of us would do in that situation. He picked up the phone, and he called his commanding officer to push back. He explained the obvious problems, the risk, the capability mismatch, The fact that this was going to slow down operations and put SEALs in unnecessary danger. He laid out the case carefully, and his commanding officer listened. Then his commanding officer asked him a single question. He said, "Jocko, do you understand why we're doing this?" And Jocko realized, in that moment, that the honest answer was no. He didn't understand why. He understood the order. He understood what it required of his men, but he didn't truly understand the strategic purpose behind it. And because he didn't believe in it, he couldn't possibly transmit belief to the men he was about to send into combat with this mission. So his K.O. walked him through it. The American military couldn't stay in Iraq forever. Eventually, the country had to stand on its own. The only path to that future was through an Iraqi army that was capable of fighting its own war. And the only way that was going to happen was if elite American units, like Task Unit Bruiser, were willing to slow down, take the harder road, and bring their Iraqi counterparts up with them. If Jocko's SEALs operated alone, they would win every fight they were in, but they would lose the war. Because the moment they went home, the country they had bled in would collapse. Jocko understood, finally. And once he understood, once he believed in it, something changed in him. He was now able to walk back to his platoon, look his men in the eye, and tell them with full conviction why they were doing what they were about to do. And that is the principle. It has a name too. Believe. In order to convince your team to truly believe in the mission, you, as the leader, have to believe in it first. Not as a slogan, not as a posture, as a real conviction, deep enough that you can defend it under pressure when your team starts to doubt. If a leader doesn't believe in the orders coming from above, the team will sense it instantly. People are not as easy to fool as we sometimes assume. Soldiers know when their commander is half-hearted. Employees know when their manager doesn't actually agree with the new policy. Children know when their parents are reciting a rule they don't actually live by. The pretense always shows. So when an order comes down that you don't agree with, the principle says, don't fake it. Don't pretend to believe and walk it forward. Go up the chain. Ask why. Push for an explanation. And when you get one, really sit with it. Look at it from the perspective of the bigger picture. Ask yourself if there might be a strategic logic that the people above you can see that you can't from where you're standing. Most of the time there is. Most of the time the order that seemed crazy from your seat makes sense from theirs. And the moment you understand it, you can lead with belief, which is the only kind of leadership that actually works. But here's the harder part. What happens when you come to believe in a mission and your team still doesn't? That brings us to a different night in Ramadi and to a different chapter of this same book. The chapter is called Check the Ego, and it begins with what Jocko's task unit will forever remember as their welcome to the city. Most of Task Unit Bruiser had only just arrived. Some of them had been on the ground for a few hours. They were still unpacking gear, still figuring out where to sleep, still adjusting to the temperature. When the shooting started, enemy machine gun fire suddenly raked their tactical operations center. Tracer rounds zipped overhead. The whole base went to alert in seconds. What happened next is one of those moments that, if you weren't there, you almost can't believe it. Within minutes, every SEAL in the task unit was on the rooftop returning fire. Some of them hadn't even fully geared up. They were in flip-flops, t-shirts, shorts under their body armor, helmets thrown on, weapons in hand. They poured up the stairs and started laying down such a volume of fire that the enemy attack just collapsed. When the shooting finally stopped, one of the SEAL machine gunners turned to a friend with spent shell casings everywhere around his boots and said, "That was the first time I've ever fired my machine gun in combat. On my third deployment. Welcome to Ramadi." Now here's why that scene matters for the principle we're about to talk about. Because Task Unit Bruiser walked off the plane in Ramadi believing, quite reasonably, that they were the most lethal humans on that battlefield. They had every right to think that. They had the best training, the best gear, the best men. They had every reason to feel like they were about to dominate the war, and Ramadi was about to humble all of them, because Ramadi, in 2006, was the most violent place in Iraq. The enemy was hardcore. The attacks were sophisticated and coordinated. American soldiers and Marines were being killed and wounded constantly, and the SEALs, for all their elite training, were, in the larger picture, a small piece of a much bigger machine. Conventional army units, Marine units, Iraqi forces, tank crews, combat advisors, air support, civil affairs teams, engineers, intelligence officers. If Task Unit Bruiser walked into that environment believing they were better than everyone else, they would alienate every unit they needed to work with. They would miss intelligence. They would lose support. They would, in the worst case, get people killed. So Jocko makes a decision early on. The SEALs in his task unit will do something most elite units don't. They will check their egos. They will treat the conventional army officers as equals. They will go to the planning meetings. They will share their intel. They will eat with the conventional troops. They will laugh with them. They will help them. They will be, above all else, humble, even when their training and reputation gave them every excuse not to be. And here's the principle. It's the third one in the book, and it's deceptively simple. Check the ego. Ego clouds and disrupts everything. The planning process, the ability to take advice, the willingness to accept constructive criticism, even the ability to honestly assess a mission's success or failure after it's over. When ego runs the show, leaders take credit for wins they didn't earn and dodge blame for losses they did cause. They argue with subordinates instead of listening to them. They reject good ideas because the good idea didn't come from them. Ego is what convinces you that you're the smartest person in the room, and it's what guarantees you'll never get any smarter. Now look, Jocko and Leif are not anti-confidence. They are not telling you to walk into your job tomorrow and apologize for existing. SEALs are some of the most confident humans on the planet. You have to be to do that work. The principle is not don't have an ego. The principle is don't let your ego eat your judgment, because here's what happens to most leaders in business and in life. When ego takes over, things start going badly. The market shifts, the sales numbers drop, a project fails, and instead of looking at the situation honestly, ego whispers, "It's not my fault. The team is the problem. The market is the problem. My boss is the problem. My competitors are cheating. The board doesn't understand me. Everyone else is wrong and I'm right." And the leader, because their ego won't let them consider the alternative, doubles down on a strategy that isn't working. They blame the team. They burn relationships. They refuse to ask for help. They insist on being right, all the way down. The opposite of all that is what Jocko did when he walked into that meeting after the Blue on Blue. The opposite of all that is what Leif did when he ran Hell Week and watched the senior chief's experiment work. The opposite of all that is what Task Unit Bruiser did when they walked into Ramadi and decided to be partners, not princes, with the conventional units around them. Believe in the mission. Then check your ego at the door, because the leaders who can do those two things together, who can carry deep conviction in what they're doing, while staying humble enough to learn, listen, and admit when they're wrong, are the leaders who win. The other kind don't. So that's how the book opens. 3 personal principles. Take ownership. Don't blame the team. Believe and stay humble. These are the inner battles, the wars you fight inside your own head before you ever lead another human being. But this book has another half, and in the second half, Jocko and Leif move from the war within to the war of running an actual team in motion, to the laws of combat, the principles that govern how teams move, communicate, and fight together when the bullets, literal or metaphorical, start flying. Section 4. The laws of combat. Cover and move. Simple and decentralized command. Picture a SEAL element pushing through a Ramadi neighborhood. It's the middle of a hot Iraqi afternoon. They're moving from one building to the next. weaving between cars, ducking behind low walls. There are enemy fighters in this neighborhood. Everyone knows it. The question is when they'll appear, not if. Now here's what's happening that the casual observer wouldn't see. While one part of the element moves, another part is set up in a covering position, weapons trained on every direction the threat might come from. As soon as the moving group reaches their next position, they set up cover, and the original cover team starts moving. The motion is constant, like a leapfrog. There is never a moment when one team is exposed without another team protecting them. This is called cover and move, and it's the first of the laws of combat in the book. The principle is straightforward: teamwork. No element of a unit can operate effectively in isolation. Every part has to be supporting every other part, all the time. The moment one team starts trying to win the fight on its own, two things happen. They become more vulnerable, and the rest of the team becomes useless to them. But cover and move isn't just about combat. Jocko and Leif tell a story from a corporate consulting engagement that makes this hit close to home for anyone who's ever worked in an organization with departments. Picture a meeting room at a small company. Jocko is sitting in. The CEO is going around the table asking for status updates. The head of operations is talking, and he's complaining bitterly about the field crews. The field crews aren't following his procedures. They're doing things their own way. They're cutting corners. They're making his job impossible. He says, with real frustration, "I can't get those guys to do anything right." Jocko stops him, and he asks, "When's the last time you went out and worked with one of those crews? Spent a day with them? Saw the job from their side?" The man pauses, thinks, and quietly says, "Never. I've never done that." And there's the problem, because that operations leader had stopped seeing his field crews as part of his team. He had started seeing them as obstacles, problems to be managed, adversaries who were making his job harder. And the moment a leader starts thinking that way about their own team, cover and move dies. The leader stops covering. The team stops moving. Everyone is operating in isolation, blaming each other, and the whole organization grinds to a halt. Jocko's advice to him was simple. Go work with your field crews. Spend a few days in their boots. See what they're actually dealing with. Then come back and ask yourself who's actually been failing whom. Now, the second law of combat is one of those principles that sounds so obvious you almost dismiss it. But the more time you spend in any organization, the more you realize how rare it actually is. The principle is simple. Combat is chaos. Plans go wrong the moment the first shot is fired. Communications break down. People get tired. People get scared. And the more complicated the plan was at the start, the faster it falls apart when reality starts hitting it. Jocko and Leif's rule is brutal in its clarity. If your team can't understand the plan, they cannot execute it. So make it simple. Even if you have to strip out things you wish you could include, even if you have to fight the urge to look smart. Most leaders fail this principle without realizing it. They build elaborate systems. They write policies that nobody reads. They draft mission statements with so many clauses that nobody can repeat them back. And then they wonder why their team isn't aligned. The team isn't aligned because the team can't even remember what they're supposed to be aligned around. Jocko has a story about a manufacturing client who had built a compensation system for his sales team that was so complex the salespeople literally didn't know how their bonuses were calculated. They'd run a sale and have no idea if it would help their commission, so they stopped optimizing for it. They just sold things in whatever way felt easiest, because the system was too complicated to game intelligently. When Jocko helped them simplify it down to something the salespeople could understand in 5 minutes, sales went up. Not because the math was different, because the team finally knew what to optimize for. Simple wins, always. Not because complicated leaders are stupid, because complicated plans don't survive contact with reality. Which brings us to the third law of combat. And this one is, in some ways, the hardest, because it asks something of leaders that most leaders are temperamentally unwilling to give. The principle is decentralized command. In a SEAL operation, no single commander can possibly see every angle of what's happening. There are SEALs on rooftops, SEALs at street level, SEALs breaching doors, SEALs covering exits. Things change second by second. If every SEAL had to wait for permission from the boss before making a decision, they would all die, period. The fight moves too fast. The information is too scattered. The boss can't possibly know everything. So in SEAL doctrine, decision-making is pushed down. Junior leaders are trusted to make calls. Operators on the ground are trusted to make calls. The senior commander provides the intent, the why, the bigger picture, the boundaries of what's acceptable, and then steps out of the way. The team executes. They make adjustments. They handle problems at the level where the problems are actually visible. But this only works under one condition. Senior leader has to trust the team. And trust in this principle is not a feeling, it's a discipline. It comes from training, from shared standards, from clear communication about intent, from building junior leaders up deliberately over time until they have the judgment to make good calls under pressure. Most leaders fail at this in the opposite direction. They micromanage. They want every decision to come back to them. They demand to be in every meeting, on every email, in every approval chain. They tell themselves they're being thorough or careful or responsible, but what they're actually doing is destroying their team's capacity to lead, because every time a leader takes a decision away from a junior leader, that junior leader gets a tiny bit weaker. Their judgment doesn't develop, their confidence doesn't grow, and over months and years, the leader ends up with a team of people who can't decide anything without checking in, which means the leader becomes the bottleneck for everything, which means the team can't grow, which means the leader is now trapped in a job they built with their own hands. Jocko and Leif say it this way: the leader has to make sure that the people closest to the problem are empowered to solve it. Otherwise, problems pile up faster than the leader can address them, and the team starts to die. So put these three together. Cover and Move says, every part of your team has to be supporting every other part. Simple says, your plan has to be understandable to the most exhausted, most stressed, most junior member of your team. Decentralized Command says, your team has to be able to make decisions without you, because you cannot possibly be in every room at once. These three principles aren't independent. They reinforce each other. A team that doesn't support each other can't run a simple plan effectively. A team that can't understand the plan can't make their own decisions inside it. A team that can't make decisions falls apart the moment leadership isn't watching. Together, these three principles describe the architecture of a team that actually works under pressure, not a team that performs in calm conditions. Any team can do that. A team that performs when things go sideways, when the plan breaks down, when the day goes wrong, when everything is harder than it was supposed to be. But of course, even the best built team will, eventually, face a moment where everything is going wrong at once, where 5 problems are happening simultaneously, where the plan has collapsed, the comms are broken, and the leader has about 2 seconds to decide what to do next. What do you do in that moment? How do you not freeze? How do you not panic? How do you make the right call when there is no good call? The answer is the principle that, in my view, is the most useful idea in this entire book, and it was tested in real time on a rooftop in South Central Ramadi, on a day that almost ended with one of Leif Babin's men dead in the street. Section 5. Prioritize and execute. South Central Ramadi. Summer 2006. The sun has come up hours ago, and the heat is now suffocating. Inside a 4-story apartment building, Leif Babin and his Charlie platoon SEALs have been pinned down for most of the day. Enemy machine gun fire is hammering the building from every direction. Armor-piercing rounds are punching through the concrete walls. RPG rockets are exploding against the exterior with bone-jarring concussion. Glass and concrete fragments are raining down. Every man in the building is hugging the floor, because to lift your head is to die. In one of the rooms, a SEAL operator named Ryan Job is firing his big machine gun out a window, standing up, in the middle of incoming fire, calmly putting 3 to 5 round bursts into enemy positions. A few rooms over, the platoon chief is laughing as bullets snap through the windows on either side of him. This is what Charlie Platoon called a big mix-it-up. They were big tough frogmen, and the big tough frogmen's job was to be in places like this and not flinch. But the day is wearing on, and as the afternoon comes, Leif gets word over the radio that an Iraqi force a few blocks away has discovered a massive IED, an improvised explosive bomb that the insurgents had wired to detonate as part of an ambush. The bomb has to be destroyed before it can kill someone. The plan is for an explosive ordnance disposal technician, an EOD specialist, to set a charge on the IED that will safely detonate it. But that means everyone in the area, including Leif's platoon, has to be out of that building, far from the blast radius, in the next few minutes. So Leif gives the order to move out. The platoon starts pulling off their rooftop positions, gathering gear, heading down to street level, and then, in the middle of the controlled chaos of the withdrawal, something happens that no plan had accounted for. One of his SEAL operators, moving across the rooftop, steps onto a section of roof that wasn't built to hold a man with 100 pounds of gear. The roof gives way underneath him. He falls, not just to a lower floor, through the entire building, all the way down, and lands in the street below. He doesn't move. Now imagine the position Leif is in. He's standing on an exposed rooftop in the middle of enemy territory. The sun is going down. His SEAL is lying motionless in a street that's controlled by insurgents. The IED is wired and about to detonate. The way to street level is blocked by a heavy iron gate that's been padlocked shut. There are still SEALs and Iraqi soldiers and EOD techs in the building, and a head count hasn't been done. Enemy fighters could appear at any moment. Air support is limited, and every option Leif can think of has at least one good reason not to do it. 5 problems, all happening at once, all competing for his attention, all life and death. So what does he do? What every untrained person does in a moment like this, and what most leaders in their daily lives also do, just at lower stakes, is panic, or freeze, or try to solve all 5 problems at the same time, which is the same thing as solving none of them, or fixate on the most emotional problem, which is almost never the most important one. The natural human instinct, when Leif's man is lying, possibly dying in the street, is to scream his name and run to him. That instinct is overwhelming, but Leif doesn't do that, because he had been trained over hundreds of hours in a single principle that was about to save lives. The principle is prioritize and execute. Here's how Jocko and Leif explain it. When you are overwhelmed by problems, you cannot solve them all at once. You will fail at every one of them if you try. So instead, you do something almost mechanical. You step back, mentally and emotionally. You create distance from the chaos. You look at all the problems in front of you, and you ask one question: what is the single highest priority right now? Not what's the most emotional, not what's screaming the loudest, not what's tugging at your heart. What is the single most important thing that has to be addressed first? You direct your team's full attention to that one thing. You execute on it, and only when that's handled, only then do you ask the question again: what's the next highest priority? You execute on that, and the next, and the next, one at a time, in the right order, methodically. In SEAL doctrine, the way they verbalize this, in the middle of combat, when everything is on fire, is 3 short words: relax, look around, make a call. Relax, look around, make a call. So back on that rooftop, Leif has every instinct screaming at him to run to his fallen man. He suppresses it. He looks at the situation, and he sees clearly what the highest priority is. Not the man in the street, not yet. Because if he sends people running into that street to recover his man right now, with no security set, they will all be exposed to enemy fire, they will all become casualties, and the rescue will become its own catastrophe. So Leif gives a single, calm order: set security. His chief steps in, organizes the SEALs, gets weapons trained on every direction the threat could come from. Within seconds, they have machine gunners covering the streets, SEAL shooters covering the rooftops. The perimeter is secure. Now, and only now, can they move on to the next problem. Next priority: get away down to the street. The locked iron gate is the obstacle. Leif calls for a breacher, a SEAL trained to blow doors. The breacher moves up. He goes to work. Next priority: head count. Make sure every man is out of the building before that IED detonates. Leif calls for a head count. His lead petty officer takes it. Room by room, person by person. Within seconds, every man is accounted for. The breacher gets through the gate. The platoon flows down to the street. They reach their fallen man. Miraculously, he had landed on his rucksack, which broke his fall. He's banged up. He has a serious laceration on his elbow, but he's alive, and he's going to be okay. They evacuate. Within minutes, they're at a safe distance. Behind them, boom. The IED detonates exactly when the EOD techs had timed it. A massive fireball that would have killed everyone in that building if they'd still been inside. And nobody, not a single American or Iraqi soldier, was wounded by that bomb. Because Leif Babin, in the middle of 5 simultaneous catastrophes, did not panic. He prioritized and he executed, one thing at a time, in the right order. Now here's why this principle is, in my view, the most useful idea in the entire book. Because most of us are not going to be on a rooftop in Ramadi, but most of us regularly find ourselves in moments where multiple problems hit at the same time. The boss wants 3 deliverables by the end of the day. The kids are sick. The car broke down. A friend is in crisis. A bill is overdue. 3 different people are texting you with 3 different urgent requests. And what do most of us do in those moments? We freeze. We open 10 browser tabs. We start one task, get distracted by another, abandon both for a third. We send a half-finished email. We snap at someone we love. We feel by the end of the day like we worked 12 hours and accomplished nothing because we tried to solve everything at once and ended up solving nothing. Prioritize and execute is the antidote. It's a discipline. It's a way of forcing your own brain in moments of overwhelm to do something it doesn't naturally want to do, to stop, to breathe, to look at all the things demanding your attention and ask honestly, what is the single most important one? Not the loudest one, the most important one. Then to give your full focus to that one thing, to finish it, or to get it to a place where it's no longer urgent, and only then to move on. Jocko adds something else worth noting. He says, when you're a leader, your job in moments like this is to actively step back from the front line. Don't try to be the one solving every problem yourself. Get yourself slightly above the chaos so you can see all of it. Because if you put yourself in the middle of the firefight, swinging at every threat, you stop being able to lead. The team needs someone with their head up, watching the whole field, calling the priorities. Pull yourself off the firing line. See the bigger picture. Then direct the team where to focus. And one more layer to this. Jocko points out that the best way to handle moments of overwhelm is not to handle them in the moment. It's to prepare for them in advance. He calls this contingency planning. Before something goes wrong, ask, what could go wrong? What are the 5 most likely things that could fall apart on this project, in this trip, on this operation? Walk through each one mentally. Decide in advance how you would respond, so that when one of them actually happens, and one of them usually will, you're not figuring it out under pressure. You're executing a plan you already made when your head was clear. This is, by the way, one reason why elite military units rehearse so much. Not because they think the rehearsal is going to look exactly like reality. They know it won't. They rehearse so that when reality starts breaking the plan, their bodies and their minds have somewhere familiar to land. They've practiced moving through chaos, so when chaos comes, they don't freeze. Relax, look around, make a call. 3 of the most useful words you will ever learn. Whether you're standing on a rooftop in Ramadi or sitting at a kitchen table at the end of a brutally hard day. Now we move into the final part of the book, and here the principles shift again. They're no longer about the war within yourself. They're no longer about the laws of how teams move in combat. They become about something larger, about how you sustain a team's success over time, how you plan for what's coming, how you handle the people above you, the people below you, the bureaucracy, the politics, the long grind of actually keeping a team alive after the heroic moments are over. And the section opens with a story that, more than any other in this book, reminds you why these principles matter at all. Section 6. Plan and leading up and down the chain of command. Before I tell you this story, you need to know 3 names: Mark Lee, Ryan Job, Mike Mansour. These are the men this book is dedicated to. They are the men who didn't come home from Ramadi. Mark Lee was a SEAL in Charlie Platoon. He was the first SEAL killed in action in the entire Iraq War. He died in the middle of a firefight in the heart of Ramadi, in a battle for control of the city. The day he was killed, another beloved Charlie Platoon SEAL, Ryan Job, the same SEAL who had stood up in that window with his big machine gun, fearless, blasting back at insurgent positions, was hit in the face by an enemy sniper round. He survived, but the round took his sight. Ryan would never see again. 3 weeks later, as he recovered in a hospital in Germany, the family was given the news. He was permanently blind. And then, near the very end of the deployment, in what would likely have been one of his last operations, a SEAL in Delta Platoon named Mike Mansour was on a rooftop in Ramadi when an enemy hand grenade was tossed into his position. Mike could have moved. He could have ducked. He could have let his teammates take the blast. He didn't. He dove on top of the grenade. He absorbed it with his own body, and he saved every man around him. Mike Mansour was awarded the Medal of Honor, the highest combat award in the United States military, posthumously. Mark Lee was awarded the Silver Star. The book is dedicated to all 3 of them. And before we talk about the next 2 principles, you should hold their names in your mind, because the principles we're about to discuss are the ones their leaders had to live by, in their honor, after they were gone. The first of those principles is plan. Now, you might think a chapter on planning would be the most boring chapter in a book about combat. But Jocko and Leif make a case here that for any leader, planning is one of the most underrated skills there is, and one of the easiest to do badly. Their argument is that good planning has a structure. It's not just figuring out what you're going to do. It's analyzing the mission, identifying the available resources, walking through what could go wrong, communicating the plan in a way the team can actually understand and execute. And critically, after the operation is over, debriefing it, going back over what worked, what didn't, what the team should learn for next time. Most teams fail at this last part. They run a project, the project ends, everyone moves on, and nobody ever sits down and asks, what just happened? What could we have done differently? What's the lesson for next time? So the same mistakes get made again and again, year after year, because the team never paused long enough to learn. Jocko's rule is brutal in its honesty. If you don't debrief, you're not a real team. You're just a group of individuals who happen to work together. And inside the debrief, the same extreme ownership principle has to apply. The leader has to model it. The leader has to be the first one in the room to say, here's what I got wrong. Here's where I failed you. Here's what I'm going to fix next time. Because if the leader doesn't go first, no one else will. The room will fill with politeness and excuses, and the team will learn nothing. The second principle in this section is, in my opinion, one of the most underappreciated ideas in the entire book. It's the principle of leading up and down the chain of command. Picture Leif and Jocko. After they've come home from Ramadi, sitting in the United States, they had lost Mark Lee. Ryan Job had come home blind. Mike Mansour was gone. And then, back home, far from the war, Leif starts hearing whispers from senior officers in the SEAL community who had not been in Ramadi, whispers that Task Unit Bruiser had taken too much risk, that their sniper operations had been just whack-a-mole, that what they did in that city wasn't worth what it cost. And Leif's first reaction when he hears this is fury. Because how could anyone sit in an office stateside and second-guess the decisions of men who had bled in those streets? How could anyone reduce Mark Lee's death, Ryan's blindness, Mike's sacrifice, to abstract questions of operational risk? Part of Leif wanted to find the critics and confront them physically, but here's where the principle kicks in. Because Leif had to make a choice in that moment. He could stay angry. He could write off the criticism. He could decide that the senior officers above him simply didn't understand what his men had done. Or he could lead up. Leading up the chain of command is a principle Jocko and Leif believe deeply in. The idea is this: just as you, as a leader, owe your team clarity and support, you also owe the leaders above you the same thing. You have to take responsibility for making sure your boss understands what's happening on the ground. If your boss is making decisions based on bad information, that's not their fault. That's yours for not communicating well enough. If senior leadership is criticizing your team unfairly, the answer is not to see the in private. The answer is to find a way, patiently, professionally, persistently, to explain, to bring them the information they don't have, to help them see what their position prevents them from seeing. Leif eventually did exactly this. He didn't punch anyone. He sat down with critics. He explained the strategic context of what Task Unit Bruiser had done. He laid out the larger campaign in Ramadi, how their operations had supported the US Army's broader effort to wrest control of the city back from the insurgents, how the sniper overwatch missions had directly enabled American combat outposts to be established in neighborhoods that had been completely lost, how the success in Ramadi had set the conditions for the Anbar awakening when the local tribes finally turned against Al-Qaeda. Once the senior officers understood the bigger picture, the criticism almost universally went away. But here's the harder part of this principle. Jocko and Leif say, if your boss is pushing back on your team, the first place to look is not your boss, it's yourself. They use a phrase that's almost shocking in its directness. They say, there is no bad boss, only bad subordinates. Now hear them out, because what they're not saying is that all bosses are good. Plenty of bosses make bad calls. What they're saying is that, just like extreme ownership turns the gaze inward when teams fail, leading up turns the gaze inward when bosses fail. If your boss is making bad decisions, ask yourself, am I giving them what they need to make good ones? Am I communicating clearly? Am I bringing them solutions or just problems? Am I supporting their efforts or undermining them? Am I trying to understand their position or just resenting it? In their experience, almost every problem with a boss could be traced back, at least in part, to a failure of the subordinate to lead up effectively. And the same principle works in the other direction. Leading down the chain, making sure your team understands not just what they're doing, but why. Not just the tactical orders, but the strategic context. Because a team that understands the why will figure out the how, even when leadership isn't there. A team that only knows the orders will fall apart the moment the orders run out. So plan and lead up and down. Two principles that sound, on the surface, like dry leadership concepts. But underneath each of them is something deeper. The willingness to go back and review what went wrong, even when it's painful. The willingness to take responsibility for your boss's effectiveness, not just your team's. The willingness to translate the why down to every member of your unit, so that even when you're not there, they can carry the mission forward. These are the principles that turn good leaders into ones who keep teams alive, long after the heroic moments are over, when the war becomes the slow grind of years. And the final two principles, the ones we'll cover next, are the ones that pull all of this together. They're about how a leader makes decisions when there is no clear answer, and about the strange paradox at the heart of every great leader, that to be free, you have to first be disciplined. Section 7. Decisiveness amid uncertainty and the dichotomy of leadership. Picture a SEAL team in a small briefing room getting ready for a night mission. The intelligence is incomplete. They have a target, a suspected insurgent leader, but the information is hours old. They don't know exactly how many people are inside the building. They don't know if the building is rigged with explosives. They don't know whether the neighbors will join the fight or stay out of it. They have estimates. They have probabilities, but they don't have certainty, and the launch time is in 20 minutes. So what does the SEAL commander do? Wait until the intelligence is perfect? That moment will never come. Cancel the mission and play it safe? The target moves and the chance is gone forever? Demand more information from higher headquarters? They've sent everything they have. He has to decide. And he has to decide now, with the information he has. This is the principle Jocko and Leif call decisiveness amid uncertainty. And it's one of the most counterintuitive ideas in the book, because most of us, when we don't have all the information, default to delay. We tell ourselves we're being careful. We tell ourselves we're being responsible. We say things like, let me think about it. Let me sleep on it. Let me get more data first. And sometimes that's wisdom. But just as often, much more often than we like to admit, it's fear dressed up as caution. Because the truth Jocko and Leif learned in combat is that the leader who waits for certainty dies. Or worse, gets their people killed. The world doesn't pause while you collect more information. The enemy moves, the market shifts, the window closes, the opportunity passes, and by the time you finally feel ready to decide, the moment to decide is gone. So they argue something almost uncomfortable. The leader's job is not to make the perfect decision. The leader's job is to make the best decision possible with the information available, and then commit to it fully, to execute as if the call you made was the right one, even though you know it might not be, and to adjust if it turns out you were wrong. Indecision, in their view, is almost always worse than a wrong decision, because a wrong decision can be corrected. A wrong decision generates information. You find out something didn't work, and you change course, but indecision generates nothing. The team waits, energy drains, confidence collapses, and while the leader is sitting on the fence, problems are getting worse on both sides of it. Now, of course, this can't mean recklessness. Decisiveness is not the same thing as gambling. The principle isn't make a fast call no matter what. The principle is gather what you can in the time you have, then decide and commit. Don't let the absence of perfect information paralyze you. Don't let fear of being wrong stop you from being a leader at all. And here's something most people miss about this idea. Decisiveness, in the way Jocko describes it, is actually a form of humility, because it requires the leader to admit openly, I don't have all the information. I might be wrong, but I'm going to make the call anyway because someone has to. And then, if I am wrong, I'm going to own it, and we're going to adjust. That's the opposite of arrogance. That's the willingness to be accountable for an imperfect call in front of your team every single day. Which brings us to the final principle, the one that closes the book, and in some ways, the one that ties all the others together. The principle is, discipline equals freedom. The dichotomy of leadership. Here's a story Jocko tells about his own early career in Baghdad. His SEAL platoon had been running raids on suspected insurgent safe houses. The missions had a basic shape: breach the building, secure it, identify the people inside, search for evidence, and get out. The first part they had trained for endlessly. Breach, clear, secure. They were elite at it, but searching the building for evidence? That they had never been trained on. So in the early operations, they did what any rowdy group of armed young men would do. They ransacked the place. They flipped over furniture. They emptied drawers onto the floor. They tore down curtains. They smashed televisions and radios looking for hiding spots. And they often found things, but they also missed things. Critical intelligence got lost in the chaos, and the searches took 45 minutes per house, sometimes longer, long enough that staying in one place was becoming dangerous in itself. Then a new Iraqi court system came online, and the rules changed. To prosecute the men they were capturing, the SEALs now had to maintain a strict chain of custody on every piece of evidence. Document where it came from, photograph it in place, label which room, keep it organized. So Jocko tasked his assistant officer in charge with designing a more disciplined search procedure. The officer came back with a plan. Each SEAL had a specific role. One person sketched the layout of the house. Another labeled every room with a number. Another photographed evidence in place. Each room had a designated owner who collected items, bagged them, and labeled them. When a room was finished searching, the room owner crossed off the room number, so anyone walking through could see exactly what had been done. And when the assistant officer briefed this plan to the platoon, the reaction was almost universal hostility. One SEAL said it would take too long. Another said, "Why are we changing what's been working? If it ain't broke, don't fix it." A senior SEAL said, with real conviction, "This is going to get someone killed. We can't sit on target waiting around with all this paperwork while insurgents come find us." Jocko stood his ground. He explained the why. He pointed out that in the old system, they were missing critical evidence, that they had completely failed to search a bathroom on the last operation, and nobody had noticed. He explained that the new procedure would actually be faster once everyone knew their role. He gave them practice runs in abandoned buildings on base. The first run took 30 minutes, the second took 20, the third took 10. Then they tried it in real combat. Downtown Baghdad. They breached, cleared, searched, and were back out in under 20 minutes, with organized evidence, with nothing missed. They had taken what looked like more rules, more discipline, more constraint, and turned it into something the platoon had never had before. Speed, efficiency, freedom of movement, the ability to hit 2 or even 3 targets in a single night, where before they could only manage 1. Discipline equals freedom. The phrase Jocko had been taught early in his career that he now lived by. Discipline, the willingness to follow a structured procedure, to do things the harder, more methodical way, paradoxically gives you more freedom in the long run, not less. The undisciplined platoon was constrained by chaos. The disciplined platoon was free to operate at a speed and scale they had never reached before. And Jocko applies this principle far beyond combat. He says it starts the moment your alarm clock goes off in the morning. The discipline to get up instead of pressing snooze. The discipline to work out instead of staying on the couch. The discipline to plan your day instead of just reacting to whatever shows up. The discipline to eat well instead of grabbing whatever's easy. The discipline to do the hard task first instead of saving it. None of that sounds like freedom. It sounds like rules. It sounds like constraint. But the person who exercises that discipline day after day ends up with something the undisciplined person never gets: energy, time, capacity, health, money, skill, options. The undisciplined person feels free in the moment. They sleep in, they eat what they want, they follow whatever impulse arrives, and over years that feeling of freedom collapses into a much smaller life. Their body gets weaker, their finances get worse, their relationships erode, their options narrow. They become trapped, not by rules, but by the consequences of having had no rules at all. Discipline is the bridge between who you are and who you want to become. And the more you build it, the more freedom on the other side of that bridge actually becomes available to you. But Jocko adds a second idea to this final chapter that, in my view, is the deepest insight in the whole book. Most summaries skip it. I won't. He calls it the dichotomy of leadership. The idea that almost every leadership virtue taken too far becomes a weakness, that every principle in this book has a counterbalance you have to hold at the same time, or the principle itself will destroy you. Be aggressive, but not reckless. Be confident, but not cocky. Be brave, but not foolhardy. Hold your team to high standards, but show them you care about them as people. Take extreme ownership, but don't be a martyr who refuses to delegate. Be decisive, but not so rigid that you can't change your mind when the facts change. Plan thoroughly, but don't fall in love with the plan because reality will break it. Lead from the front, but not so much that you can't see the bigger picture. Be confident in your decisions, but humble enough to know they might be wrong. Every single principle in this book has a shadow side, and the great leader, in Jocko's view, is the one who can hold both ends of the rope at once, who can be tough and tender, decisive and open, disciplined and adaptable, owning the failures and giving the team credit for the wins. The leaders who fail are the ones who pick a side. They become so aggressive, they get reckless. So decisive, they become rigid. So disciplined, they become brittle. So focused on ownership that they can't trust anyone else. So humble, they can't lead. The dichotomy collapses, and they collapse with it. So the final lesson of the book is this: hold the tension. Be willing every day to live in the uncomfortable middle of opposing virtues. Never let any single principle override the wisdom of all the others. Be a leader who can flex, who can read the room, who can be one thing in one moment and the opposite thing in the next, without losing yourself in either direction. Discipline equals freedom, and the dichotomy of leadership is what keeps you human, even as you carry the burden of leading others. Key takeaways. So we've covered a lot of ground. 12 principles, 3 parts, 2 co-authors, and a single city in Iraq that taught both of them what leadership actually is. Let me pull the threads together. First, and above all else, extreme ownership. The leader owns everything, not the convenient parts, everything. When the team fails, the leader looks first at themselves. When the team wins, the leader gives credit to the team. The moment a leader starts looking outward for blame, the team begins to die. Second, there are no bad teams, only bad leaders. The single greatest variable in any group's performance is who is leading it, not the conditions, not the people, not the gear, the leader. So if you've been leading a team that's struggling, the most useful question you can ask isn't what's wrong with them, it's what's wrong with how I'm leading them. Third, believe and check the ego. You cannot lead a mission you don't believe in. So when you don't understand an order or a strategy, go up the chain and ask why. And when you do understand it, lead with conviction, but also keep your ego subordinate to the mission. Don't let pride get in the way of taking advice, accepting criticism, or admitting when you were wrong. Fourth, the laws of combat. Cover and move means every part of your team has to be supporting every other part. Departments cannot operate as adversaries. Teams cannot work in isolation. Simple means your plan has to be understandable to the most exhausted, most pressured, most junior person on your team, or it isn't a plan at all. Decentralized command means your team has to be able to make decisions without you, because you cannot possibly be in every room. So train them, trust them, empower them, and then get out of the way. Fifth, prioritize and execute. When everything is falling apart at once, you cannot solve it all simultaneously. You will fail at every problem if you try. So step back, identify the single highest priority, focus the team's full effort on it, and only when it's handled, move to the next. Relax, look around, make a call. Sixth, plan thoroughly and lead up and down the chain. Walk through what could go wrong before it goes wrong. Debrief honestly after every mission. Take responsibility for making sure your boss has the information they need to make good decisions. Take responsibility for making sure your team understands not just what they're doing, but why. Seventh, be decisive even when you're uncertain. The leader who waits for perfect information will never lead. Make the best call you can with what you have, commit to it, adjust if it's wrong, and own whatever happens. Eighth and finally, discipline equals freedom. The structure you build into your life, your team, your work, the rules you follow when no one is watching, are what give you the capacity to operate at a higher level than anyone around you. And whatever virtue you embrace, hold it in tension with its opposite. The dichotomy of leadership is the price of admission for being human, for being trusted, for being followed. 12 principles, one book, and one quiet, uncomfortable truth running through all of them. Almost everything you've ever blamed on circumstance, almost every team you've ever called bad, every boss you've ever called impossible, every project that's ever failed on you, almost all of it traces back to one person, sitting in a chair you can't blame, looking at a face you can't avoid. Closing. At the very beginning of this video, I asked you to imagine two teams on a freezing California beach, same boats, same exhaustion, same misery, and how the worst of those teams became the best within 30 minutes when one single thing changed. By now you know what the answer means. You know why that night on the beach mattered. You know that what changed wasn't the weather or the equipment or the men, it was who stood in front of them. But there's a question this book leaves you with that I want you to sit with for a moment before this ends. In the team you're leading right now, at work, at home, in whatever role you carry, when something has gone wrong recently, where did your mind go first? To the conditions, to the other people, to the bad luck, or to the chair you yourself were sitting in? Because that question, more than almost any other, will tell you what kind of leader you currently are, and whether you're capable of becoming the kind of leader the team in front of you actually deserves. If anything in this book grabbed you, it deserves a full read. Jocko Willink and Leif Babin's writing is direct, honest, and full of combat detail and business application that no summary can fully capture. There are dozens of stories I didn't have time to tell, specific frameworks for running planning sessions, debriefs, and decision processes that you'd find genuinely useful. You can grab the book on Amazon or listen to it on Audible. Jocko's own narration is, by reputation, one of the best author-read audiobooks ever recorded. The links are in the description below. If you got value out of this video, hit that subscribe button so the next deep dive comes straight to your feed. And if you'd like to support the channel directly, those affiliate links in the description are the simplest way to do it. You get the book, the channel grows, everyone wins. Thank you for spending this hour with me. Lead well.